This is the Mindful Cranks, and I am your host, Ron Purser. Our way of knowing seems seduced into seeing things, including ourselves as the self as the knower, as substantial. We believe and take for granted that the world is a myriad of things and objects, that the passage of time is real, and that we could rely on science to tell us how to live and what has meaning and value. Whether it's our fascination with neuroscience or whether we are perpetual spiritual seekers, it seems the answers we find never seem to fully satisfy us. And that's because we suffer from a fundamental and deeply rooted belief and set of assumptions that there is a substantial external world out there and a substantially existing internal world in here, in its givenness as I, me, mind, and myself. This is what Zen Priest Steve Hagen calls the Grand Delusion. And it's a topic of our conversation based on his book of the same title. Steve Hagen has been contemplating these deep existential questions and this great matter of liberation from delusion for nearly 60 years. Now semi-retired, Steve Hagen is founder of the Dharma Field Learning and Meditation Center in Minneapolis, and author not only of The Grand Delusion, What We Know But Don't Believe, but many other books such as Buddhism Plain and Simple, Meditation Now or Never, Buddhism is Not What You Think, which I read in the early 2000s. We cover a lot of difficult themes in this conversation, from how our modern worldview operates from unwarranted assumptions that perpetuates our belief in substantiality, to why our reliance on neuroscience to reveal the mysteries of the mind is a dead end, to the challenge of using language to point out what cannot be grasped conceptually, and much more. Steve Hagen, welcome to the show.
It's good to be here, Ron. Thanks.
Yeah. Well, you begin the book, The Grand Delusion, by reminiscing that when you were a younger man, you came across Bertrand Russell's ultimate question: why is there something rather than nothing? And you say it sort of haunted you for a while. I'm wondering what you meant by that.
Yeah, well, it struck me as it was just out of the blue. I hadn't really contemplated anything quite like this, but as I looked at it, it seemed like, yes, why is there something rather than nothing? But then very quickly, it seemed like there was no way to respond to this. Whatever I would try to put there, it just seemed to fade off without anything coming back. And so it did begin to seem, well, it struck me almost immediately as this is a pretty deep question. I no longer feel that way about it, but it did strike me pretty intensely. I was probably still in my teens, I think, when I encountered that.
Yeah, I wanted to share with you a memory I had as a young child, that I was perhaps about 6 or 7 years old. And I remember sitting in my bedroom by myself, and I would just stare at everything in the room. And I kept asking the question over and over again, what is this that is this? Almost like a mantra. And the question scared me as a kid. And but at the same time, it seemed like it enlivened my perception. And I didn't get any answer, but so when I first read that it haunted you, it reminded me of that memory.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think many of us, experience something like that early in life. But then we get so involved with so many things, we begin to forget about that. But whenever we slow down and quiet down and just look at this, what is taking place here, it's rather mystifying at first. And what is this exactly? And I think that ended up becoming kind of the focus of my life, at least what got me started until I finally began to realize a few things about this question, which I tried to write about in my book, The Grand Delusion. So,
Right. Talk to me about your discovery of Nagarjuna and his Madhyamaka philosophy, because that seems to me to be a real turning point for you, perhaps.
yeah, I think it was. I had been looking into Buddhist teachings and Taoist as well. By the time I was getting into my late 20s, and then I stumbled. I encountered Nagarjuna here and there, references to him anyway. But I was a visitor. A friend of mine had traveled out into, I believe it was we were somewhere in North Dakota, a little town where he had a friend that he knew from college or something of that sort, I think. And he wanted to just drop in and see him. And so while they were visiting, I was sitting there in the living room on the couch and next to an end table that had a book there, and it was what was the title now? I don't remember. Um, but anyway, but it was on Nagarjuna's Mula Majamka Krikas, and I started to read that, and it immediately it just really kind of spoke to me. But my first encounter with it, I started arguing with it a bit, but quickly I started to realize this wasn't like anything I'd ever encountered before, and I went out and got my own copy of the book, which I no longer have. But shortly after that, I started picking up the different translations. Well, there weren't that many available at the time, but of Nagarjuna's Mula Majamaka Krika. And I just, it captivated me. It held me. And I would come back to it from time to time. And even as I was beginning to get more involved with Zen writings and teachings, and even the practice, I was still turning to Nagarjuna. And it was some years later, but though I never encountered anyone who had ever really, you know, studied him. But when I first met Katagiri Roshi, uh, the first time I heard him speak, I could hear references to Nagarjuna, not direct references, but I could tell it was Nagarjuna in the background of what he was saying. And so immediately I realized this is the guy I wanted to study with. I had been traveling about the country and looking for a teacher for some time. I was back in Minnesota, my home state, when I discovered Katagiri right back here in my in my own home. And because I was actually prepared to travel to Japan, and because I thought maybe that's where I could find a teacher. No, I was right here in. I'm from northern Minnesota, but here he was right here in Minneapolis.
Yeah.
That was it for me, really.
Wow. Yeah, getting into your book, The Grand Delusion, and early on in the book, actually, it seems like one of the main challenges is disabusing ourselves of our assumptions that there must be something in contrast to nothing.
Mm-hmm.
And our ordinary logic seems to have this almost like an inherent bias, which biases towards assuming that there actually are material things and substances in the so-called real world.
Yeah, well, these things are very compelling.
Yeah.
We can see them, we can hear
Yes.
them, and touch them, and taste them, even think and feel these things, and yeah, so it's quite compelling. It's not too surprising that we would
Right.
make that assumption. What I discovered, much to my surprise, is that it's kind of a invalid assumption on our part. Uh,
Or mhm.
because to the extent that we would accept the substantiality behind the appearances of these various things and thoughts and feelings, now we have no chance of understanding mind or consciousness or the actual immediate direct experience itself, which is always fleeting and changing, and you can't get hold of it. You can't grip it in any way. And so it was uh, just contemplating, that proposition there. That do we actually have something that finally opened the door for me to realize the depth and expanse of what it is that we actually live out and experience.
Yeah, it seems that normally even when we use such an ordinary phrase that there is, we point to something, like there is a tree or something that exists, something that's real. But that's not limited necessarily just to external perceptions, right? We're also pointing internally all the time to,
Well, certainly. Mm-hmm.
yeah. And so this brings up the question, I think, of how we conceive of appearances, or maybe how it seems like we're imputing substantiality to what we're perceiving. Is that
Mm-hmm.
getting close
Yes.
to?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Uh-huh. And it seems that what you're saying in the book is that it's an active process. It seems like we're essentially taking our perceptions and then conceiving them as substantial things. So I think you referred to that we become substantialist. I was wondering if
Yes.
you could unpack that more.
Yeah. Well, the substantialist is just one who, as I was speaking of it in the book, this is one who deeply believes in the substantiality, the tangible realness of whatever images or ideas, uh, that come to you, and that there's something behind these things. That's an odd thing that takes place there. It's in doing that, it seems like we don't actually accept the thing or the thought, the feeling. We believe, we carry on as if there's something behind it,
Hmm.
because the actual surface of what it is that we seem to be experiencing really doesn't offer any kind of substance. And so there's the assumption that, well, but yes, but this is so real. And so then we assume there's something behind the facade of the perceptual experiences that we feel that we're having. The actual pure perceptual experience, though, doesn't give us anything.
Mm-hmm.
And we can discover this if we, through very careful examination of our direct experience, we can begin to realize that there isn't anything really formed there within the experience, that these are appearances that come about. Later, I started to realize this is what the awakened in the Buddhist schools would refer to as consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a radically different way of understanding our experience and consciousness and mind than we
Right.
find here
Yeah.
in the West.
Yeah, I think we'll get to those terms. And you're very precise in the book about how you use language and refer to certain words. I think we'll get to that. But it seems almost as if what you're saying, that your challenge is almost like a frontal attack on consensus reality, in the sense that
Yeah.
your inquiry is asking us to question our so-called common sense,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
that we can directly see or know, understand what is really inconceivable in a way, which sounds like complete
Yes.
nonsense in a sense.
Mm-hmm.
The
Yeah.
farthest thing from common sense.
Yeah. In a way, when we're so used to relying on the conceptual and what it is that we can conceive, what it is that we can grasp, and that we don't even understand that we're granting the substantiality to it that we think is already there, inherent in it, somehow behind the facade of what it is that we see and experience. But as we continue to observe this, and that's the thing we need to do, is to learn to observe it without commenting on it,
Mm-hmm.
or putting evaluating in one way or another, thinking that this is good or bad or whatever, but just to coolly observe the actual experience, we can begin to realize the lack of substantiality within the experience. But far from that being leaving it all vacant, if we stay with that and drop the insistence on our part that it has to have some kind of substance to some body, some uh, weight or something of that sort, realness to it. If we can uh, get past that, drop that, not insist on that, and it's hard for us to realize, that it doesn't. But if we can actually see, and we can, if we can really get in touch with just the direct perceptual experience of the moment, we can realize the lack of substantiality in it. And if that can be followed without too much of a delay, rather than thinking that we're sliding into nothingness or that everything is vacuous and empty in a kind of a conventional way, uh, rather than just simply lacking the assumed substantiality, we would finally see the true nature of what the experience actually is, and that it isn't holding anything that we can get hold of or draw out as if it can persist from moment to moment. We were ignoring the actual experience of the moment, which is vibrant and changing constantly. There's no aspect of it that is holding still, even for an instant. And now we can begin to see the true nature of what is actually taking place here without any solidity behind it. In other words, we can wake up to life, to reality, to mind and consciousness, the actual vibrant experience, that we know.
Yeah. A lot of attempts to do that seem to be sidelined or obstructed in a way by what you call flat earth questions.
Mm-hmm.
And I really like your analogy in the book about a thought experiment that having us imagine that we were living in the dark ages.
Oh, yeah.
Do you want to tell that analogy? I mean, it sounds like, I mean, it's a very helpful analogy when I read it. Is it something you can just summarize a bit?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
Because I think it'll
Yeah.
help illuminate some of the difficulties here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, it's just the image of, we can imagine that, say, if you're walking along a beach, say on an ocean, or I grew up near Lake Superior, which I know when I was living out in California, people didn't believe that you can't see across Lake Superior, but you cannot. If you, it's that big. It's 450 miles long. Anyway, but if you're walking along a beach and uh, and there's just the blue horizon out there, uh, you might be, say your friend is someone who believes, deeply believes, just doesn't even have another thought about it, that the earth is obviously flat. Well, now you can start to point out a few things to this person, that if you look carefully at, say, this approaching ship on the horizon, if you're looking carefully, get out some binoculars. You might have to explain the function of the binoculars to the person, but they can actually see the boat, the ship, rising out of the water as it approaches. And there's all sorts of other things, the movement of stars and planets and the change of seasons. It's on, that we can begin to just show how all these various things are related. But that the explanation is that, well, the earth isn't flat. It's it's round, it's curved, it's really a ball in the end. And suddenly, if the person could actually have that shift in their mind, they would begin to, uh, well, not just simply clarify all kinds of questions they might otherwise have. These questions will will appear as ill formed. They only come about because we're ignoring something. We're not
Mm-hmm.
taking in the full experience.
But
And
if that person continued to rely on their so-called common sense at the time that the Earth was flat, that a lot of these uh, suggestions you are giving your friend would seem kind of crazy.
yeah, you kind of have to take it step by step and
Right.
show how, yes, well, if the Earth were flat, well, uh, now how do you explain the fact that the North Star sinks beneath the horizon as you travel south, or that when you get into the south, the stars start swirling in the opposite direction, south of the equator? And there's all sorts of things that you could be pointing to that they would have a difficult time explaining. And yet, by just changing that one item in your mind, well, the earth isn't flat, you see. And all of a sudden, there's all kinds of, and I point to a few in the book. Off the top of my head here, I can't think of the examples I used, but there's plenty of them. These things would just suddenly clear up.
Yeah.
And in fact, for the most part, they wouldn't even be questions anymore. And in like manner, I use that as an analogy for what would happen here if we could uh, see that the actual experience that we're having in the moment is um, without substance. It's non-substantial. Yeah, I wouldn't say insubstantial, but I don't know if I've used that word here as we were talking. But it's really the real word that I would use would be non-substantial.
Right.
And with this shift in our understanding, realizing, seeing what it is that we're actually looking at, or tasting, or hearing, or thinking, feeling, that it lacks substantiality, this would clear up all kinds of mysteries for us, including the mysteries of mind and consciousness, which really plague us today. These things will remain a mystery as long as we think that somehow these things are produced by some kind of substantial matter out there, you know.
It seems like perhaps being a Zen teacher, that a lot of your work is dismissing, or not, maybe not dismissing is the right word, but dealing with a lot of flat earth questions.
Mm-hmm.
And when you said that if we can shift towards this understanding, it sounds almost as if, and I don't know if this is correct, but that it becomes almost like a view. I know view is not a good word because it sounds like there's a strong position.
Well,
But the notion of non-substantiality seems to be like telling the person in the Dark Ages, no, the Earth is a sphere.
yeah, that's kind of where the analogy breaks down, because now you're
Yeah,
asking them to grasp another idea,
right. It
that
breaks
instead of
down.
being
It's not
flat.
quite
Yeah,
work. It doesn't quite work.
no,
Yeah.
but what I'm proposing here, or not really proposing, but just
Yeah.
saying that if we could see through, because it's not a matter of dropping your view that things are substantial and out there and they persist through time unchangingly and this sort of thing. If we could see through that, it's not a
Mm-hmm.
matter of me arguing that that's all they are. Why don't you see it that way? It's a matter of, if you just look, and stay with it, and stop that conviction, which often can come out in the form of words and dialogue or arguments or whatever in your mind, that there actually is something behind the facade of what is appearing here. If you can actually, it's a matter of just seeing through that rather than taking on a new argument. And because I'm not really not making an argument here.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
If it's I am, I'll drop it, because
Yeah,
that's
you're
really
not
not.
trying to put forth another position that we should adopt.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Because that's what happened. That's what I experienced some time ago now. But in my Zen practice, I suddenly realized I could see for myself directly the lack of substantiality in what was being experienced. It wasn't an idea. It wasn't an argument. It wasn't a conviction. Nobody uh, insisted that I take it. And it is very sad. You just took a little sip there a moment ago. Say I use the analogy of sipping orange juice, something with some real zip and flavor to it. If you want to know the taste of orange juice, say you've never tasted it before, somebody could explain to you what it tastes like and that sort of thing. But you would never know the taste until you yourself pick it up and hold it to your lips and take a sip and swallow, and now you know the taste of orange juice. But that's not an argument. That's not you're not getting it from an explanation. You're not getting it through words. It's a direct, you're suddenly tasting, realizing directly the immediate experience, and which isn't conceptual. It's just a direct, pure perceptual experience. Actually, there are elements of conceptuality in that, but that's farther than we need to go today. But basically, we're getting very close now to a pure perceptual experience, and in doing that, it's utterly convincing. I mean, in the sense that since it wasn't constructed in some way that somebody is saying, well, suppose this, well, then this is what it's going to taste like, and that's no, you already know directly. And actually, as you hear people trying to describe it, it almost starts to sound silly. And and many of the things that we use, particularly like today in discussions about brain-based consciousness and things like this, from what I see now, for me, it just starts to sound silly.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
people are still arguing along these ways, even though they don't even approach, say, the hard problem as Chalmers argued that way back in the 90s. But that's the hard problem of consciousness. The question of, well, how can electrochemical processes in the brain give rise to subjective experience? Yeah. Well, there's the flat Earth assumption. You see,
Mm-hmm.
it's an assumption not based on actual reality. It's based on just something that we believe. Who says that it does? And it's never been shown in any way whatsoever for people who believe in, say, a material based substance for consciousness. Well, show me where this is, and yet people they doggedly adhere to that, and they but it but if we could break through and see that, you'll realize that there's no basis for that whatsoever. If we want to understand the nature of mind consciousness, the nature of reality, the nature of direct experience, what we have to do is look at it and
Mm.
and not take the arguments, for it. Because, like in the case of orange juice, once again, no matter how poetic you are or how good you are in your descriptions of whatever the experience is, you'll never convey the direct experience of the taste to anyone who hasn't tasted it. And there are no words or conceptual constructions of any kind that will reveal to one who's never tasted it that experience, that taste. The only way is to just actually finally taste the direct perceptual experience without conceptualizing it at all. There's also no way to tear it down for that person, to make them doubt it. I mean, what's to doubt? It's you can only doubt ideas and concepts, things of this, and doubt beliefs. But we can learn to discern this just through settling the mind. I would recommend meditation, but of a certain sort, where you're not talking to yourself about anything or suggesting anything, but just quieting the mind and staying with that and noting very carefully the actual experience of the moment.
Yeah, it seems like that you're asking the reader and asking us to slow down and question all of our tacit beliefs and assumptions
Mm-hmm.
about what we consider to be real, too.
Oh, yeah.
And,
Mm-hmm.
and I'd like to ask you about, we have this modern materialist worldview, which gives us sort of this, we're a speck in the cosmic dust sort of narrative. It's a modern vision of reality that we're essentially cosmically insignificant. I think even the late theoretical physicist Stephen Hawking said that something along the lines that we're just like a chemical scum on a moderate-sized planet.
Yes.
Or even Bertrand Russell said something like the Earth is just a petty planet on which bodies impotently crawl,
Yeah.
which seems like an extremely pessimistic and nihilistic view, deep alienation in a sense. That
Yeah.
do you think that part of our cultural malaise is due to the fact that we've become imprisoned by the complexity of our own ideas and beliefs? And
Oh,
is
certainly,
this
yes.
grand delusion and the grand delusion a profound confusion, basically about what we are, who we really are?
Yeah. Yeah. It's absolutely. And it's that we are holding convictions, we're holding views, and none of which can be substantiated. And that's what I was trying to hint at least in the book. I couldn't go on with endless examples, but showing in various ways, whether we're looking at things materially or through our mind, consciousness, however we might approach various things, we have this deep conviction of substantiality. Again, there's something behind the facade, and with that, we're left with confusion. And the basic confusion is that everything that we're thinking now, these are flat Earth assumptions. They can't be used to finally reveal to us what's really going on here. So our life here is a mystery. We don't know how we got here. Where are we going? What's this all about? I mean, what is this anyway? And it seems so absurd, or uh, and then we might start making up stories, and we can believe this or that, religions and philosophies and whatever else, or even the idea that, well, this is just nothing, and when I die, that's it. Well, yeah, this is all speculation, and none of it is necessary, because in doing all of that, and what we continue to do is we keep trying to arrange the conceptual constructs in our mind in some way that will finally answer this deep ache and need that we have of, what is going on? I want to know. Okay, we can settle that, but you will not settle it in the conceptual. You have to finally wake up to what the actual direct perceptual experience is. And in
Mm,
doing that, all of these kinds of, like I said, the flat earth questions, well, they won't even really be questions anymore.
right.
And you can see directly, and you'll stop seeking for some explanation of the taste of orange juice. You don't need it. You know the taste of orange juice. You've already tasted it. An awful lot of what we do, and the heartache and the pain, the misery, the confusion that we experience, we can bring to an end if we finally just wake up to what the actual experience is. But the problem is that the actual experience, and you're asking earlier, if is it like a view? Yes, it is a view in a sense, but it's not a frozen view. It's not an unchanging view. It's not a certainly not a dogmatic view. It's
Hmm.
not, there's no idea behind it. It's just the simple knowing of the taste of orange juice. But we're not, and at this point, I'm not talking about a single example like that that's still relying on conceptual constructs. It is a direct knowing of the whole thing, we could say, perhaps, which isn't
Hmm.
really a thing at all. But
Yeah.
if we know what just this is in each moment as it's coming up, all of those kinds of perplexities and confusions and the things that will drive us to all kinds of into all kinds of emotional states of hatred or anger or even ecstasy and or the need to find ecstasy or
Yeah.
whatnot. All of this can finally quiet down and settle down. And still, life goes on, and all the appearances. It isn't like anything changes here. But what has changed is the deep confusion and perplexity in our heart and mind can finally be brought to an end. It's just we can learn to drop that.
That brings up the point that you alluded to earlier, and I'd like to kind of maybe go a little deeper with that. In that, it seems that in the West, or maybe better in our modern world, that our understanding of mind is very murky. At least, at least with the Freudian revolution, we came to admit that there was a force or a presence operating, maybe lurking below the surface. Sometimes it was in harmony with our wishes, and sometimes it was not. But for the most part, it seems that modernity's understanding of mind is basically that of a black box, and that we really don't take mind seriously, but instead, like you have alluded to, that we've resorted to descriptions of what we think or
Yeah.
believe mind is based on our concepts. And what we call mind in modernity is usually equated with the brain's functioning. So,
Yeah.
therefore, if that's so, we need to study the brain. Like in the 19th century, it was phrenology,
Yeah.
and but today it's fMRI images.
Yeah.
But this whole quest to map the neural correlates of consciousness and so on, the latest trend now is to map the neural correlates of meditation. So I guess my question is, yeah,
Yeah.
my question is, do you think this fascination and love affair with neuroscience and contemplative neuroscience, some even now refer to it as neuro Buddhism, is misguided and a dead end path? I guess
Yeah.
we've already answered that question in some ways.
I would say so. It's a dead end path.
Yeah.
It's not necessary. We will make things so complicated. Yeah, it's because our minds are complicated, and particularly when we're caught up in our conceptualizing, and there's no end to it. And one thing will breed another, and it just goes on and on. And until we realize that we're on the wrong path here, this is the wrong way to go about finally waking up to reality and what's really taking place here, we can just learn to set that down. And if we do, it's amazing that because we already, the truth. We all do. All of us, we know the truth. It's just that we don't pay any attention to it because we're so busy thinking and grasping and reaching and worrying and asking. And we keep the mind busy and noisy instead of just finally attending to what's really taking place here. So all of the kind of theorizing and then constructing of various models of this and that to explain mind, conscious, or anything else for that matter. Uh, in the world of this and that, that we appear to be in, uh, there's a lot of good that can come from this sort of thing. We can um, learn how to do this or that, or to construct this or that, and so a lot of these things can be functional and useful. A lot of them can also be very destructive and painful and hurting as well. But but in terms of solving the ultimate issue that we have, uh, we have to try something that's radically different, and that is really it involves this just setting down of
Hmm.
all the theorizing. And the awakened don't tell us what it is that they've awakened to, and the reason they don't is not because they're trying to keep it a secret or something. You can't. As soon as they
Yeah.
say something, that's not it. That's just another. If you were to grasp it, that's delusion. And so they don't say anything. They don't paint it out. They'll go about trying to help you notice what it is that's causing the confusion in your mind or something. These are things we can actually point to. But when it comes to, well, what is it that we need to like? Well, it isn't an object. It isn't. It isn't something out there that you can take hold of. But we can at some point, in a very vibrant and immediate way, realize that we can wake up to that and see that,
Hmm.
and and uh, uh, and that changes everything really
It's
within our own heart and mind.
it seems that one of the principal barriers is language, and
Hmm. Yes.
that there's a very pithy statement from a teacher that I've studied with for a long time, Tarthang Tuku Rinpoche. Uh, it's a really pithy little statement, and if you don't mind, I'll share it. Then we can get into this. But
Yeah.
he says, "We say that to communicate, we need a common language, but that way of looking heads straight for the conceptual.
Hmm.
Wisdom comes differently.
Yes.
For wisdom, we need experience, blessings, and a thorough explanation of mind. Then we can connect with the lineage internally ourselves." And it seems like that resonates a lot with what you're saying. But I'm wondering, is there a bit of a conundrum, and maybe there's not, here in trying to bring about fundamental change through presenting written materials?
Yeah. Yeah. There's uh, ultimately that's really not the way to go about doing this,
Hmm.
and because again, that's still just more grasping and taking hold of one thing or another. The teachings and the written materials that we might resort to, if these are directing us to notice what we're doing, and are just encouraging us to see if you can realize what you're gripping and how you're gripping, and if you can loosen your grip a bit, they can point to things of this sort. But to go further than that and to say this is what you will find or something
Hmm.
like that, if you put some other kind of image there, another concept, that destroys the whole thing. It just leaves us right, right where
Yeah.
we've been all along, and that's the problem with this. And it's a bit frustrating, not only for students or practitioners who might want to take this up, but also for the teachers too to point this out, because in the end, how do you point out something that can't be pointed out? But what we can do is point to the snags and the snares and where we get tripped up.
Hmm.
And so if we get acquainted with all of this, then we can learn in our own mind to just see if you can notice when this is happening now, and this is what's caught you in this moment. And maybe we can learn to let that go.
So pointing out and challenging these structures
Hmm.
of language that language imposes. But I'm wondering if
Yeah,
I'm curious then is if to know whether that's why you chose this kind of very unique format for the Grand Delusion, because it's in the
yeah,
format of a dialogue,
yeah, yeah.
dialogical format, not just strict prose, which I found very very engaging actually.
Yeah, I stumbled on that. It was the first time in any of the books I've published. I've never done one quite like this before. And as I was working on it, my general day would go where I'd write in the morning, and then at midday or so, early afternoon, maybe I'd go for a walk. I live near a lake here, and I'd go for a walk around the lake. And I always carried a little notepad with me in case ideas would come to me. And what I noticed was, as I'm walking, I would hear it was like my own voice, repeating some of the things that I'd written, and then I'd hear this other voice in my mind arguing with me, which was good. I wanted to hear the arguments and challenges to whatever it was I was writing. And at some point, this went on for some time before I realized, well, this is the way to write the book. I could, so I created that character, anyone, because it could be anyone would come up with these questions. And I wasn't sure it would work. I started writing I guess I did a couple of chapters this way or whatever, and then I showed it to my editor and see what he thought of it. And he much to my surprise, I thought he was going to reject it, but he thought it was pretty good. And also my wife, I let her read it, and yeah, she thought it was. So
Well,
I thought,
there's
okay, then maybe
a
it's working. So
well, there's a lot of humor in it at times too.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But and then sometimes these voices actually would be coming from, we'll say, students or other people that I might be talking to about some of these topics. So some of them were actually live that I got when I was
Hmm.
writing the book. So yeah.
Well, yeah, I think it's interesting that. Well, I guess the point I want to make is seems like language sometimes is made into the enemy too. That I found it ironic that the Zen tradition, for example, which prides itself on the signature line that it has, right? A special transmission outside the
Hmm.
scriptures, not
Yeah,
founded upon words and letters. But if you
yeah,
look
yeah.
at Zen masters like Dogen, it's the incredible corpus
They,
of words and letters, and
yeah, yeah,
Koan literature.
yeah. Right.
Uh,
Yeah,
um, but I guess what I'm getting at, it seems like there is a bit of a misconception in some Western Buddhist circles that language is the enemy, or
yeah,
even critical intelligent thinking or inquiry. Everyone should just sit and meditate and sit in silence as if they're going to escape language. So I wonder, you're like I said, we need to communicate, but it can lead right to the conceptual at the same time.
yes. That's right. Yeah. Well, I remember when I first finally started to realize what this was, or what our practice was, and what we were doing. Then my teacher wanted me to start giving more talks. I had been giving some student talks, but I told him, I said, "Well, we can't talk about this, and I don't know how. What can we say?" And what he said to me was, he said, "Well, if you don't say anything, no one will understand. We have to say something."
Wasn't there a book by that
But
title?
yeah, in fact, it was his. I
Yeah.
edited that book. It was
Oh, yeah, I got that book. Yeah.
a collection of some of his teachings. And but that title came right from a conversation that we had. Well, and then he, like, I don't know, a week later or so, he gave a talk on this very point that you have to say something. And but I realized from that, even though at first I didn't feel like I could say much of anything, but gradually I learned to uh, to use language in a way that maybe would help to point. At least that's what I tried to do, both in my lecturing and also in my writing too. So. Um, and actually, I'll be teaching a course this spring now in March at the Dharma Field Zen Center in Minneapolis on words, or using a vocabulary of enlightenment.
Hmm.
And where the awakened, they'll use words in a very unusual way, not the orthodox way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's very confusing for many of my students. And so I thought, well, I think I'm going to just offer a class on this, and it'll just be a 4 week class. That'll be coming out next month. But just trying to help people to understand, particularly the peculiar ways that I use words in my writing, and by capitalizing or italicizing, and this isn't. I don't do it haphazardly or casually.
You have a
Yes.
glossary in the back of the book that
Yeah. Hmm.
really helps
Yeah.
to say, look, I don't mean this. This
Yes.
is the
Yeah.
conventional meaning of the word.
Hmm.
And that
Yeah.
is extremely useful, I think.
Yeah, and I'll be the course I'm doing will be kind of using that book, but I'll be including other things as well.
Hmm.
But that's a very important thing because language. It is easy to misuse it. Language can become the enemy, I suppose, but I wouldn't view it that way because we
Right.
do need to use it, and but we can learn to use it, carefully. And though I realize in everything that I say or write, it's always flawed. There's always something I can go in there and pick it apart myself. So, but still, to the extent that we kind of limit it to where we're just pointing out things for the reader or the listener to get some sense of where they are. But then in the end, too, you can remember Suzuki Roshi in his well known book, Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind. He reminds us in there somewhere. I think he was talking to students where he had been lecturing, and he just points out to them that he said, when my talk is over, your listening is over. There's no need to remember what I said. And I remember when I first read it, I thought, well, this is before I understood myself. I thought, well, what's the point of listening if there's no need to remember it, or. But now I do understand because it's not in the words. The teacher isn't trying to get you to grasp words or a concept or anything of this sort. And often, if they do throw out a concept, they'll probably want to follow up at some later date if they realize that you're hooked on this idea. Now they're going to have to help you, you know, at least disabuse you of, of that
Right.
idea. Uh, because in the end, you can't really hang on to it at all. But words can be used to point. It's helpful to listen to, say, Suzuki Roshi when he's talking. Now you're listening, and when the talking is over, the listening is over. If we think in our conventional way, of course, you would leave the talk carrying something with you, taking something away that would be of value. But when it comes to this matter of waking up to reality, that's deadly. And but it is in the actual listening while it's taking place that the assistance or the help that we need is being offered. And all you need to do is or if you're reading too, it's while the reading is happening, uh, just really focus on that. I wouldn't spend a lot of time analyzing it or taking notes or comparing different passages and things like that. This isn't particularly helpful. This keeps us in a very conventional kind of mind, which
Hmm.
is relying on the grasping of certain ideas and principles and things of this sort. When if we're interested in waking up to reality, to truth, to what's really taking place here, this is something utterly fluid, and you can't grasp any bit of it. But you can finally see what it is. You can realize directly what is actually taking place.
Yeah,
And
I
so
think
it isn't so important that we, it's like our normal academic kind of studies now, where we are trying to learn this or that, and how you're prepared to take the test and all the stuff that might be required. But this is something different. It's radically different than that. It really is an academic study at all.
right. And you're sort of saying there's a different relationship or attitude towards what one's listening to or reading, that we're not reading to immediately say, what does this mean to me? Or we're not immediately comparing it to something we already know.
Right.
Oh,
Yes.
this is this. Oh, yeah, this is like this.
Yeah.
That kind of mentality. And
Yeah. Hmm.
yeah, yeah. I'd like to ask you, move into this notion that the seductive quality of how we're taken in by, it seems that has a lot to do with the fact that this illusion has a certain persistence. You even have a couple chapters actually, devoted to that. One chapter is titled "The Persistent Illusion of Persistence,"
Hmm.
and
Yeah.
this persistence over time,
Hmm.
uh, itself, a construct that's quite
Yeah.
persuasive, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Uh, and I guess maybe another way of getting into this is that there's a lot of reference to impermanence, obviously, in Buddhism is one of the three marks.
Hmm.
And um, but I've often seen impermanence interpreted as a bad thing, almost that it's almost like Buddhism's boogeyman or something. It's
Yeah.
It seems like you, as you point out, it's often misunderstood that there's this misconception that we're adhering to the notion that there are actual things or entities that are impermanent or have the quality of impermanence.
Yeah, but
But
that's impossible.
right, I mean, but it seems that there is this tendency to just see it as some sort of thing, rather than actually a gateway into
Hmm.
direct seeing.
Yeah, well, what's permanent is just simply thus this. Uh, it's just the immediate direct perceptual experience. It is always thus. It's always now. It's always here. There's never any experience that isn't here and now, and it has nothing to do with place or time. But
So yeah, so you differentiate, or now is not the present moment within a past,
right,
present, future nexus. It's not in time.
right.
Uh,
I spelled that out in the book.
but past
But
and future and present, those are all concepts too, in a way.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So, and time, time
Yeah.
is, and the way we mark it out, this is all the conceptual construct of the experience. But reality itself isn't of that nature. And it can exhibit that. It can show it through the functioning of mind or consciousness. It looks that way, seems that way. It seems to be ticking away, and there's here and then there's there. But and again, like with the quieting of the mind and the settling down into seeing just this without putting something there that's not really there, we can begin to realize that actually you can't really say that we have time, that we have movement, that we have change, that we have position and here-ness and there-ness and that sort of thing. On the other hand, as I point out in many, many ways about many, many things in the book, is that we also can't make an argument in the other direction, that we don't have these things. They certainly appear to be here, and we can't ignore the appearances.
Mhm.
But this, if we finally start to see that it isn't that it is, and it isn't that it isn't, then we can begin to see the true nature of what's actually unfolding here all the time. And this applies to ourselves, our own dear self here, whether we're looking at ourselves bodily or just some mental or emotional, uh, state that we might be in, as we'll conceptualize it. Uh, but also to the world out there and other people and experiences and even stars and galaxies. I mean, whatever it is we want to look at or contemplate. It is all of this nature, and can't say is, can't say isn't. That gets us back to that original question: why is there something rather than nothing? And what I finally realized in my life experiences, that's a flat Earth question. We don't actually have something, but at the same time, we clearly, most people wouldn't argue with this. We don't have nothing. This isn't nothingness here. Something seems to be going on, but what? And you'll never get hold of it. But here it is. And so, what's taking place here then isn't like it isn't in the terms of being, well, is that it is, and it isn't in terms of that it isn't. It's just thus, just this. And now this gives us life. This is fluid. This is ever changing. Nothing's holding still. And here now we get to permanence too. What is permanent about this experience is just simply thus. But the various things that appear to be coming and going, thus, including ourselves and whatever you want, thoughts and ideas, and as well as objects and other people and all of this. The reality of it is that you can't say that they are, can't say that they are not. Were things to actually be in the way that we think that they are, persisting from moment to moment, now there's no way to understand mind or consciousness. It would be as if nothing were happening at all. And clearly, this isn't what's being experienced. So we can't go to either of those extremes of somethingness or nothingness. The experience is obviously not at the extremes.
Yeah.
It's everything in between. We could call that the middle way.
So it seems like you're suggesting that we're not looking really for any kind of specific answers to these
No,
questions. Rather, it's more like cultivating
the mind that sees, really.
uh-huh. And
Yeah.
one of the
And
conundrums
understands.
I think one of the conundrums is that to initiate this kind of inquiry or embark on this path of inquiry while using that same conceptual mind to do so, isn't there some challenge here that we often are caught in almost like a self-referencing
Mm-hmm.
system or a mind loop? I think you made this point earlier that somehow we have this doubt that we can actually do this, like you say.
Yeah.
Instead, we want to turn to our reliance either on science to provide these answers or even spiritual seeking. I'll find it somewhere. The pot over the rainbow is somewhere.
Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
No matter how sophisticated our concepts or we seem unable to look directly at our own experience.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
Yeah, we're always looking out there. And but we have this saying in Zen that Buddhas don't seek. The awakened people who have awakened, they don't seek.
mm-hmm.
And as long as we continue to seek, we're looking for something out there. And enlightenment or getting the answer or something, even just getting a new car, whatever it might be that we're struggling with and trying to get to. If our concern is to wake up, just realize that seeking isn't going to help. Because what are you seeking? Are you going to make up something now and make that a goal? You set it out there in your mind and you're going to go after that. But that's just some image that you created. And
Yeah.
So it doesn't work. So just forget all of that and just sit down and start paying attention.
Yeah,
without talking to yourself.
Yeah, that seems to be where meditation can
Yes.
go awry, because if this
yes.
The Grand Delusion isn't understood or taken seriously, then it seems that there's no difference if we're telling a story to a friend at a bar or whether we're telling our story to ourselves in meditation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It sounds like the same mechanism's operating.
Yeah, you have to start to recognize that that's what you're doing. You're telling yourself something here. And that's why I tell my students, watch your mind. And is it peaceful? Is it settled? If you're jabbering to yourself or explaining something to yourself, or you're harboring some anger there or whatever, or some love, you meet this beautiful person that now you're infatuated. And that's lovely. That's wonderful. Maybe you can get infatuated with the idea that, I can find this awakened mind or something of that sort. But just be aware of what's going on in your mind, and realize that everything's fine. You don't have to drive anything out, or you don't have to conjure something up. Start to become aware of what's actually going on from moment to moment. And of course, taking these moments where we're not doing much of anything, such as just sitting there in quiet settledness, it might become easier to just observe the mind. And but don't try to stop it. Don't try to steer it. Just observe it. Start to get to know its nature. And pretty soon, I don't know, pretty soon, it could take years. But at some point, you might start to, if you're really quiet, because the only thing that disturbs you from really, truly waking up is yourself. You will put something there. And you have to really get to recognize this on an exceedingly subtle level when you're doing that. Gradually, we can learn to. You don't even have to get to the point where you can stop it. I don't know if anybody can stop it, at least for more than a brief period of time. But it can weaken to the extent that it'll be far less frequent and less intense. You can weaken it to the extent that all of a sudden you can see the falseness or the I don't know, the lack of credibility, I guess, of the constructed world that we otherwise live by, and that'll shine through at that point. So then we can, find perhaps the mind that we were otherwise seeking, but you can't get to it by seeking. You can get. There's no even getting to it. You can, because we're already there. It's just a matter you can finally wake up to where you are and where you've been all along.
I'm wondering, you've been a Zen teacher at Dharma Field for quite a long time. I think you've maybe are not teaching quite as much as you were, but you've been around the block here, in so to speak. And I think there is a strand within some Western Buddhist circles that or even the average person would can really doubt that this complete inner freedom is possible, that uh, they're not really convinced that there could be uh, this sort of a direct seeing, this awakening, liberation. And
Hmm.
I've seen some Western Buddhists seem to have kind of settled into kind of a form of Buddhist or Buddhist stoicism, or a Buddhist
Yeah.
existentialism,
Yeah.
or, kind of a psychologizing of Buddhism, try to make the
Hmm.
best of our situation and become a little less reactive, a little happier. Uh, those aren't necessarily bad things, of course, but at best, we can aspire to be kind of an individualistic sense of human flourishing.
Hmm.
I've seen that, and
You see,
it's it.
you're still operating out of an idea there,
Well, yeah,
and that's what you got to be watching for.
it seems that liberation is seen as a nice aspiration, but they've decided it ain't going to happen to them. So let's just settle for what's manageable or practical. There's even a strand called pragmatic Buddhism. But anyway, uh, uh, so these sound like they're still operating under particular positions or views of the Grand
Hmm.
Delusion in a way.
Yeah.
Uh
Oh,
huh.
yeah. Yeah. If you're operating with any notion or idea in your mind at all, uh, yeah, that's still bondage. And I've often have said this to my students. That people might ask you, why do you meditate? And you can start saying things. Well, I want to calm my mind. I want to wake up. I want this and that. And I'm always so anxious and whatever. And yeah, you can put a lot of things there. And I think it was. I think I kind of remember back. I've been doing this over 50 years now.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, I'm approaching 60. I think at this point. But I'm in my age. I'm 77. So, but I've been at this quite a while. But I think I probably started out with ideas like that. And at first, it took me a while to realize I was really interested in this. I was already kind of meditating without thinking too much about it. But then I started to have notions of why am I doing this? And yeah, it's for one reason or another. But at some point, when I finally really understood, woke up to what this is, I can just tell you I have no reason why I meditate. And I've been doing it now, like I said, I'm approaching 6 decades now. And while I might have had reasons in the beginning, that's just going to make it hard for you. When I finally started to realize what this was, and at some point I started to realize I have no idea. It doesn't mean if I put it that way, it sounds like I don't know. I know full well why I do this, but it's not an idea.
Mm-hmm.
It's a direct knowing and realizing what this is, and nothing will keep me from it. And it doesn't matter what happens to my life if I'm thrown into a dungeon or whatever. You can always do this, no matter what the situation. But I'm just saying that you
Yep.
can't operate with this if you have some kind of idea, or I'm going to be this kind of a Buddhist or that kind of a Buddha. This will be my technique or
Mm-hmm.
whatever. People sometimes will say, "Well, I practice Shikan Taoza," which is
Yeah.
very
I hear that question a lot. What's your
so for
practice?
yeah,
What's your
yeah.
practice? It
Yeah.
sounds so,
Yeah.
I don't know, serious. And
Yeah, well, and then you're forcing them to put something there, to
yeah,
construct something. And again, this is all bondage, and we have to just recognize bondage when we see it, both in
that,
our own mind and in the kind of constraints that might be put on you by others or whatever.
yeah, I think that brings up this point that in a way we're living in our own conceptual map and not seeing reality. There's that old metaphor of the map and the territory, which breaks down
Hmm.
at some point too, but
Yeah.
we aren't seeing the territory clearly, but the territory isn't something or some state external to us.
Hmm.
Those are all
Yeah.
kind of reference of our conceptual baggage from the maps.
Hmm. Yeah.
So if reality itself can't be mapped within the realm of the known, uh, this sounds to me a lot like the original meaning of religion was to rebind, or yoga,
Hmm.
to yoke with.
Yeah.
Uh, is that kind of what you're suggesting? And that's really the kind of the impetus here?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's why if I'm forced into it, uh, I would say that's what Buddhism. But I don't like the term Buddhism.
Yeah.
but the Buddha way, or what the awakened teach, is truly, this is what religion is to, re. I don't even know if bind is really the right word. That is the word in religio. To
Yeah,
rebind.
that's not
Uh,
a good term there.
no, no,
Reunite,
but
or
yeah,
communion.
but in a way, it's actually not even
Not
re
even that.
anything, because we never leave it.
We've
We've
never
always been
gone
here.
astray. We've never gone
Yeah,
astray, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But I think that is the true function of religion, if you put it that way. I talk about it a little bit in the Grand Delusion, but we should be careful there not to make too much of it. But I think the deep need in the human heart and mind has been to know, to understand, to realize, out of this we create science, out of this we've created religion
Hmm.
and philosophy, and many other things as well. But it's ways of trying to answer that deep need of the heart to finally, what is going on here. And I think that the teaching of the awakened, if it's truly that Dharma, with a capital D, I would give it, is actually pointing to just that, and maybe helping us to see how it is that we keep distracting ourselves and
Hmm.
keeping ourselves from actually waking up to it, and seeing what's going on. I think that this is the real purpose or function of what I would call religion.
Hmm.
So people say, "Well, do you think Buddhism is really?" Yeah. Well, again, like, I don't like the term Buddhism, but yeah, this is I would call this religion, if you have to give it a larger umbrella term like that.
Well,
That's not to say anything, though. Actually, I suppose.
I know you're a fan of Dogen as well, right?
Oh yeah.
And there's a passage that may be a good place to end. It's that about seeing clearly our delusion. I don't know if you
Oh
remember.
yes.
To carry yourself forward and experience myriad things is delusion.
Yes.
That myriad things come forth and experience themselves is awakening. Those
Yeah.
who have
Yeah.
great realization of delusion are Buddhas, and
Mm-hmm.
those who are greatly deluded about realization are sentient beings.
Yes. Yeah. That's Genjo Koan. Yeah. Yeah. It's a beautiful passage. Yeah.
Steve Hagen, thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Ron. It was good to talk with you. I really enjoyed this.
This is the Mindful Cranks podcast. I hope you like our new look and feel, and check out our webpage at www.mindfulcranks.com. And subscribe to the Cranks newsletter to learn about upcoming guests and other events. The Mindful Cranks is pretty much on every podcast platform. Please rate and review the show on Apple Podcast or Spotify, or wherever you are so inclined. That's it for now. I'll be back soon with another amazing guest. Thanks for listening. This is the Mindful Cranks podcast. I hope you like our new look and feel, and check out our webpage at www.mindfulcranks.com. And subscribe to the Cranks newsletter to learn about upcoming guests and other events. The Mindful Cranks is pretty much on every podcast platform. Please rate and review the show on Apple Podcast or Spotify or wherever you are so inclined. That's it for now. I'll be back soon with another amazing guest. Thanks for listening.